Okay, so we're joined tonight by local historian Samuel Sjoberg. So welcome everybody to our first presentation for 2022 for Archaeology Shetland. We've worked quite a bit with Samuel on his World War II work around Lerwick area, but he's done an incredible amount of research and really written a book. If anybody hasn't purchased their copy yet, it is an excellent read, thoroughly researched, exceptionally engaging book. But I'm not going to say any more. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Samuel to kick off 2022 for us. And I hope you all enjoy. Go ahead, Sam.
Thanks, Steve, and thanks for that introduction. My name's Samuel.
Have we lost Sam?
Yes, I'm in Edinburgh, which is good broadband, but we've lost Sam.
Yes, I've lost Sam as well.
Okay. Well,
Yep, he seems to have vanished, unfortunately.
Oh no. All right, we'll give him a few minutes, see if he's
Time
able
to ad-lib, Steve.
Yes, unfortunately, I would tell stories, but I'm going to bore the tears out of everyone. But yeah, we'll give him a few minutes to see if he can reconnect. It's an unfortunate. He was having a great connection early on. Well, thanks everyone for your patience. Hopefully Sam will get back on.
Hello, I'm back.
Excellent.
Yeah, just give me a few seconds more. I don't know what happened there to get everything set up again. It's maybe just going to be one of those nights, but
That looks okay. The beast from the garage or shed or whatever it is.
Coming across well in Guruk.
what's going on here? Yeah, so hopefully that should move back and you should be seeing a picture of the front cover of the book, hopefully. Can anybody confirm that?
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, excellent. I can't guarantee the connection tonight. we'll just have to make do the best we can. So yeah, I've been a member of Archaeology Shetland since around about 2017, nearly 5 years, and I was quite heavily involved with the Stony Hill World War II project, which we did with Scotland's urban past. Some of you I've probably met before. A lot of you I probably haven't. I don't get out much these days, but hopefully we'll get to put that right this year. So look forward to meeting you in the not too distant future. So as Steve was saying, in April last year, I self-published a book titled Air Raid Islands, the Luftwaffe over Shetland during World War II. And as the name suggests, this book not only covers all the recorded air raids on Shetland during the Second World War, but also other occurrences of German aircraft within 50 miles of the Shetland coastline. So I'll read the history of the book. About 5 years ago, I was just looking to do a short research project. And what I was going to do and started looking into was RAF operations out of Sombra during the Second World War. But when I started looking into it, it was just way too big a project for me to do at the time with the time scale that I had. So I thought about doing something easier, and I thought, well, how about air raids on Shetland? I'd heard of a couple of the ones that everybody's heard of, the likes of the Run Rabbit Run raid and the attack on the 22nd of November 1939 by 5 German aircraft, which sank the flying boat in Lerwick Harbour. And on top of those, I'd heard of a few other ones, like the attacks on the lighthouses and the bombing of Lerwick on 17th of February 1941. But when I started researching, what I uncovered was truly astonishing. And I had no idea that German aircraft had been so prevalent over Shetland, especially in the first couple of years of the war. And you know, at some points, Shetland's been attacked every single day. And tonight, I'm going to speak to you.
Lost him again.
For anyone who's not seen the book, it's laid out in a diary format, and it reads like a series of short stories. So you can dip in and out of the book as you go along, or you can read it as a whole. On the right-hand side of the page there, you'll see a photograph of the Fairell South Lighthouse after it was bombed in January 1942. This isn't an incident I'm going to cover in any depth tonight. A lot of incidents I'm just going to flit over quite quickly. But if you have any questions, if you read the book and have any questions on any specific incidents, you can ask away at the end of the talk. And for all the geeks out there, like me, the book also has an extensive research section, and there's a few reasons for this. The first was just to help myself out when I was writing the book, because I can never ever remember where I've read things. Secondly, as I went along, I became a bit concerned that people wouldn't actually believe some of these things that actually happened. I mean, there's a crazy 10-day period at the end of March 1941 when Shetland's been attacked literally every day. There's bombs dropped on Sulham, Bigton, Sombra, the Fair Isle North lighthouse gets bombed, and there's several attacks on the radar stations up in Unst. And during one of these attacks, a German aircraft, while carrying out a strafing run, actually collides with one of the radar.
Well, it looks like we've lost poor Sam again, but we'll exercise a little bit of patience and see if he can reconnect quite quickly. It looks like we've actually lost a couple of people. I did get a message that somebody else was having technical issues as well.
Yeah, I think I'm back again.
Yeah, excellent.
This is really going to take a while at this rate. Can you see the PowerPoint? Is it sharing at the moment?
Not yet.
No, okay. Yeah, or maybe that's a good point. I'll turn off my video, and that might help me a bit. So I'm not sure the last bit you caught of that, but I was just saying how I hope maybe like 50, 60, 70, 100 years time, somebody might pick up the book and find it as some sort of practical use. So hopefully you're all still here, or I'm still with you. I'd like to start with some quick terms of reference. You're going to hear me talking a lot about Heinkel's, Dornier's, Ju-88s, light anti-aircraft, heavy anti-aircraft. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview of what I'm going on about. There's really three main types of German aircraft seen over Shetland, predominantly the Heinkel 111, the Dornier 17, and Junkers Ju-88. Here we have the Heinkel HE 111, probably the most famous German bomber of World War II, and it was certainly the most prevalent over Shetland during the first year of the war. It's most easily identifiable by its bullet-shaped nose, the glazed canopy.
If you want to watch, you're going to have to come through there. Because as soon as I try and walk away, I lose signal.
And its elliptical tail fin there. Most famously, one of these was shot down and crash landed on Fair Isle on the 17th of January 1941. And this is covered extensively in the book. I'm not gonna go into this one in depth tonight, but if you get the book, it has a personal account given by the pilot of the Heinkel, Karl-Heinz Thurz. Next up, we have the Dornier 17, also known as the flying pencil. This was rarer than the Heinkel over Shetland, but a lot of fishing boats and naval ships report seeing these in Shetland waters. Its most distinguishing features is the twin tail boom here at the back, and its long fuselage. It's worth pointing out that all the crew, 4 crew of the aircraft, were in the cockpit area, and this was mainly used for holding bombs. Debuted over Shetland on 24th of January 1941, and on this day, one of these aircraft dropped 4 bombs near Tingwall. And as you can see here, we have a photograph from 1940 and another photograph I took in 2016, the same spot. And what happened on this day, 24th of January 1940, 2 German aircraft were involved in attacking shipping off the east coast of Shetland. Gloucester Gladiator biplanes were sent up to try and intercept them. And while these 2 aircraft were being chased off out at sea, apparently this Dornier appeared over the central mainland, making a beeline for Sullom However, when it got there, Sullom was obscured by a snow shower. So the Dornier headed back south. By this time, it was being chased by a Gladiator. And as it got near Tingwall, it jettisoned either 4 or 6 bombs, depending on what you read, which exploded near the Loch of Longawater, which is it's north of Tingwall Airport. At the time, they thought this was done to lighten the aircraft in order to escape from the Gladiator, but the German records, interestingly enough, say that the bombs were released due to a technical fault. This might have been an excuse on their part, as at the time they were really forbidden from dropping bombs over land. Next up, we have the Junkers Ju-88, and overall, it was probably the most common German aircraft seen over Shetland during the Second World War. And when this aircraft was designed, it was faster than any other fighter of the time. Unfortunately, by the time it came to production, Britain had things like Spitfires and that could easily keep pace with it. It looks similar to the Dornier 17, and you get many first-hand accounts that confuse the two. Certainly in early 1940, when the Ju-88 first appears, you have people referring to it as the Dornier, but the German records pretty much categorically state that they were using Ju-88s. The main difference between the two is with the it doesn't have the twin tail fin that the Dornier has, but they do look very similar. And it also looks similar to the British Blenheim aircraft from certain angles. And there's an incident on the book which took place on the 18th of August 1941, when an aircraft ditched into the sea north of Unst, and a Sunderland flying boat went out from Sullom to search for the crew. And they saw this aircraft approaching them and thought it was the Blenheim. But as it got nearer, this aircraft opened fire. Turned out to be a Ju-88, and they were lucky not to be shot out of the sky on that occasion. The Ju-88 first appears over Shetland on the 1st of January 1940, when it attacks the anti-aircraft cruiser HMS Coventry in Sullom, carries out a dive bombing attack. The bomb lands 30 or 40 feet from the side of the ship, and lucky not to be blown out of the water. And most famously, one of these was shot down over Brescia on the 5th of March, 1944. And it's an incident we're going to touch on a little bit later. Next up, we have the Focke-Wulf Condor, 4-engined long-range maritime reconnaissance aircraft, often seen passing over Shetland, heading out into the Atlantic to hunt Allied convoys. Usually passed over Shetland at high level, and it was one of these aircraft that was possibly, according to the intelligence report at least, was possibly responsible for dropping bombs on Sandvik on the 26th of April, 1941. And here is the end result. It's one of 4 large bomb craters that you'll find on Vista Hill above Sandvik. As you can see, it's scalped away quite a big piece of earth there. And these are probably the best, the most easily accessible bomb craters you're gonna see in Shetland. They're not too far from the main road. But what happened on this evening, 26th April 1941, a formation of 3 aircraft were approaching Shetland from the east. Two of these aircraft passed by Sombra, but the other broke away from the formation and was later heard overhead Lerwick. Then started to circle the South mainland, and when it came back over Sandvik, it released 6 bombs, 4 of which exploded on the ward of Easter. The aircraft then turned south and flew over Sombra. At the time, there was no real plausible explanation for bombing Sandvik. It could have been an accidental release, or as one comedian told me, the pilot could have had relations from Conisborough. But an hour after bombs had dropped on Sandvik, another aircraft flew over Sombra and was engaged by anti-aircraft fire. And as an addendum to this, I was doing a talk at the Dunrossness Hall just before Christmas. And after a talk, an old woman came up to me, and she was saying, 26th April 1941 was the night that she had been born, and the family story had always been how all the anti-aircraft guns had been going off that night. And yeah, so this was a living piece of history, and I was quite happy to be able to confirm that the family story was true. Next aircraft is the Messerschmitt 110. This was rarely seen over Shetland, as it didn't really have the range to get here without auxiliary fuel tanks. But one was famously shot down by anti-aircraft fire over Sulenbo on 23rd of March, 1941. And the only other confirmed instance that I could find of one of these being seen near Shetland happened off at Unst. There was a Blenheim carrying out a radar calibration flight when suddenly they started flying alongside each other out of the blue. And rather than attack, they just stood there looking at each other, and then the Messerschmitt turned away and wasn't seen again. These aircraft only contained 2 crew in the cockpit here. So you had the pilot, and then you had the rear gunner and stroke wireless operator sitting there in the back. I'm not going to speak about RAF aircraft, as most people are familiar with Spitfires and Hurricanes. But in my mind, the anti-aircraft gunners are the unsung heroes World War II in Shetland. These were the frontline defenders who don't really get the credit that they fully deserve. If you could imagine manning one of these guns in the weather, what it's been like over this last month, it doesn't really bear thinking about. So heavy anti-aircraft guns. On the left-hand side, we have the 3-inch 20 hundredweight anti-aircraft gun, which was used in Shetland between 1940 and 1943. And on the right-hand side, we have the 3.7-inch, which came to Shetland in 1943 and stayed till the end of the war. Shetland was the last place in Britain to be upgraded to the 3.7-inch. The 3-inch gun on the left-hand side, this was a First World War gun. Really originally designed to shoot down the Red Baron, but they were in the interwar years. They were upgraded and they were still effective. Certainly at the start of the war. And this photo on the left is the nearest photo that I can find to what the ones in Shetland probably would have looked like. There is an eyewitness account by an anti-aircraft gunner who describes one of these guns and the carriage it came on. And he says that the carriage had two wooden wheels and solid rubber tires. The main difference, this 3-inch gun could fire a 16-pound high explosive shell to around about 23,000 feet at a rate of between 12 and 20 rounds a minute. And the 3.7-inch could fire a 28-pound shell to around about 32,000 feet. The main difference between the two being that the 3.7-inch could fire a heavier shell to a higher altitude and also had increased rate of fire and a higher muzzle velocity. So it took less time for the shell to travel to the target area. Really, the purpose of heavy anti-aircraft fire, it really is 3 roles. The first, obviously, is to shoot down enemy aircraft, but the chances of you doing that with a heavy anti-aircraft gun are quite small on its own. So it had secondary uses in that the anti-aircraft fire could prevent an enemy aircraft from flying straight and level during its bombing run. And the shell bursts were also useful in attracting fighters towards where the enemy aircraft were. At the start of the war, your chances of downing an enemy aircraft with heavy anti-aircraft fire was put about 4,000 to 1. So for every 4,000 shells that you fired, you would down 1 enemy aircraft. Now, to help, if you think about trying to shoot down an aircraft, this aircraft could be at, say, 20,000 feet, traveling at a couple of 100 miles an hour. So it's not as easy as pointing the gun and at the target and firing it, because by the time the shell gets there, the aircraft is going to be a long way away. So what they used alongside these heavy anti-aircraft guns was a bit of equipment called a predictor, which was a electromechanical computer, which you inputted different data into, such as the height of the aircraft, the range, and the speed. And the predictor would calculate the anticipated position of where the aircraft was going to be in the future and tell you where to point the gun accordingly. And yeah, this, along with other things such as gun laying radar and automechanical fuse setters, reduced the chances of shooting down an enemy aircraft with one of these guns as the war progressed. Now, the problem with heavy anti-aircraft fire was that, as they particularly found in Shetland, was that the guns were too slow against fast, low-flying aircraft, which was predominantly the ones that you saw around Shetland. And also, the other problem with heavy anti-aircraft fire is that they're dangerous to use at low level because the shells burst, sending bits of shrapnel everywhere. So you can't really be firing them over populated areas. So here we have an example of a heavy anti-aircraft site. There's probably 3 still in existence in Shetland that are worth seeing. There's one down at Scatness at Sunborough, and there's 2 at Bressa, one at Crewster, which is near Hjogen at the north end of the road, and the other is on the hill of Setter to the south of here. So up here we have the gun sites. This is where the guns would have been, but it's important to point out that this isn't probably how it would have looked in 1940, because there's a lot of circumstantial evidence suggesting that the site has been redeveloped around about 1943. And that's based on the number of gun sites, because we know that originally they only had 2 guns, but this was upgraded in 1943 to 4. And it also has a lot of similarities with the heavy anti-aircraft site at Setter, which we know was established in 1942. So in all likelihood, 1940, there would have been 2 gun sites, and probably none of these structures would have been here. It would have been a more simpler affair. But we'll look at these a bit more closely in a little minute. So as I said, these gun site was established in May 1940, and there's a fascinating story attached to it. They had to, obviously, these guns are heavy, and you need to get them over to Bressa in the first place, which is no mean task having to take them over on a boat. But as they tried to haul them up the hill into position, one of the guns actually got stuck in the mud, and it took a team of nearly 100 people, including commandeering school pupils from the Anderson Educational Institute, to pull it out of the mud. And there's an eyewitness account who said that even the brigadier got off his white gloves and lent a hand to try and get this gun into position. So as I said before, we have the 4 gun sites up here, down here on the left-hand bottom corner. We have the domestic site. So this would have been your accommodation and cookhouse, that sort of thing. And on the right-hand side here, we have the command post buildings, which were made up of a plotting room, instrument positions, and a crew hut, a crew shelter. At its peak in 1943, this site was probably manned by about 140 people. So you would have had gun crews that normally took about 11 men to man each gun. You would have had people working your instruments, your height finders, your spotting scopes, and your predictor. On top of that, you would have had guards, people guarding the site. You would have had a medical orderly, drivers, cooks, and a lot of people, when not on duty, would have been assigned other tasks such as fire watch, or assigned to be stretcher bearers in the event of attack, or as gas decontamination squads as well. So this is a close-up of one of the gun positions on the left-hand side.
Have we lost his sound again?
Yes, hopefully he's able to connect again just as quickly as last time. But we'll just be patient again for a minute.
Hello, I think I'm back again.
Yeah, I
Yep.
got you.
Yeah, it's going to be one of those nights, I'm afraid. So I'm not sure where I dropped out at there, but on the left-hand side, we have a gun sight here. There's 4 of these. These are ammunition lockers, which held the ammo for the guns, and there's a blast wall here to give some sort of protection to the gun crews. The gun would have sat in the middle here, and the heavy anti-aircraft guns, they came in two types. They're either static, where the hello, I think I might be back again.
Button peas, but just see what else. Lemon and cream.
Can everybody confirm that we're back online?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, I got
okay.
you.
Thank you. So yeah, on the right hand side here, we have an example of a ammunition locker. You can see it's made from concrete blocks with a solid cast concrete roof. The holes you can see in here, these would have been there would have been wooden racks within the bunker for holding the boxes of ammunition. The ammunition came in metal boxes with 2 rounds in a box, and they were stored in such a way so that air could circulate all around them to prevent dampness. The standard orders were that no 2 boxes should ever touch each other, and the ammunition was meant to be checked every day for rust and corrosion. That was what the orders were meant to be, but I came across a complaint from a unit who took over from another one down at Sumbra, and they moved in to find the ammunition in an unusable condition. They said some boxes were full of water, and the timing rings on the fuses for the ammunition was so corroded that they couldn't turn them. Next up, we have the command post positions. So on the left-hand side, we have the plot in the room, and this was really the nerve center of the site. This building was connected to the gun control room in the boys' hostel in Lerwick, and that worked in conjunction with the radar filter room, and they would pass warnings of approaching aircraft by telephone into this bunker here, and then that information was plotted on a map and relayed to the gun crews. You can see it's sort of been semi-submerged at one time, and this was to provide protection during enemy air raids. On the right-hand side, we have the remains of the instrument positions. So in here, you would have had a height finder, which not only could tell you the height, but also the range of the aircraft, spotting scopes, and also possibly this may have been where the predictor was positioned as well. Not photographed here is also another building, which is probably a shelter for the gun crews, not far away from here. And this is just a little curio from this site while I was exploring here one day back in the summer, and it appears to be a War Department marker stone. You can just here you can make out the broad arrow of the War Department insignia, and there's also you can still make out a W in here. So these boundary stones normally indicate that the site is War Department property. It's possible that this stone also had a different use, and it could actually be a survey point for the battery. Prior to construction, somebody would come along and take ranges and bearings of prominent landmarks around the area, so they could provide accurate data for the guns when they arrived. There's actually an intriguing incident that takes place at Crewster not long after the site was established, and one night a guard man on a roadblock opens fire on an unknown person who refused to stop when ordered. The guy made off into the night, wasn't seen again, but later on they found out that the telephone lines to the gun site had been cut. Now, whether this was hijinks by somebody, or was it a disgruntled crofter, or a fifth columnist, we'll never know. So, as I was saying earlier, heavy anti-aircraft guns are not really effective against low-level aircraft because the rate of fire is too slow, and also their rate of traverse is too slow. So to engage low-level aircraft, you really need one of these. And this is the Bofors 40mm light anti-aircraft gun. It was a Swedish-designed gun capable of firing 120 high explosive rounds a minute, up to a range, maximum range of about 3,000 yards, but optimally around about between 1,000 and 2,000 yards. It was particularly effective against the sort of single tip and run raiders that were seen around Shetland, and all 3 of the German aircraft shot down by anti-aircraft fire were shot down by these guns. One at Sulum, one over Bressa, and another at Fair Isle. Typically, they were manned by 6 or 7 men, and they could be used with a predictor or just fired using the gun's inbuilt sights. So this is the North Stony Hill Bofors site, and this was the site that we surveyed Archaeology Shetland and Scotland's urban past back in July 2017. And we didn't know at the time, but we know now why and when this site was established, and it goes back to the events of the 3rd of March 1941. What happened that day was that a Ju-88 approached Lerwick from the south, flying up the south mouth of the harbour. It was engaged by a Bofors gun on the nab, but that gun had to cease fire because the aircraft was too low. As it got into the harbour, the aircraft went straight towards a vessel, a cable-laying ship called the Ariel, machine gunning it and dropping bombs. The next line of defence in the harbour was the heavy anti-aircraft site at Crewster, which also couldn't open fire because the aircraft was too low, and they weren't wanting to blast the town, basically. After heading north through the harbour, the aircraft then turned south again, came back towards the Ariel, machine gunning again, and seriously wounding 3 or 4 men of the Ariel's crew who were manning one of the ship's anti-aircraft guns. The aircraft then escaped out of the harbour and wasn't seen again. Just as things were kind of getting back to normal in Lerwick, it was reported that 3 German aircraft have been spotted coming down the east coast. These aircraft were approached Lerwick from the north, and as they approached, they were engaged by the heavy anti-aircraft site at Crewster, who thought they might have possibly hit one of the aircraft, as they reported seeing bits falling from one of them, but that could have just been auxiliary fuel tanks being used by one of the aircraft. The aircraft then swung around to the east and banked in low around Underhill on Bressa, came into the harbour and started attacking shipping. Once again, by this point, the aircraft were too low to be engaged by either the heavy anti-aircraft guns or the single Bofors gun on the nab. So it was left to machine guns positioned around the harbour to try and tackle the 3 German aircraft. A brief firefight broke out, and there were many people who reported bullets flying around the town and people having narrow misses. Eventually, the aircraft left the scene through the north mouth. The heavy anti-aircraft gun at Crewster was once again able to open fire as the aircraft gained height and disappeared from view. But within a few hours of this attack taking place, an emergency meeting was held to discuss why the defence of the harbour had been so useless. And the conclusion they came to, which seemed blindingly obvious to everyone but the Royal Artillery, apparently, was that the guns were positioned too high and the enemy aircraft could just fly below them. So their solution to this was to set up a second Bofors gun site within the harbour itself, and a gun was taken from Sombra and taken to this site here at the North Steny Hill. And within 24 hours of this air raid happening on Lerwick, this site had been established. Probably not quite as it's looking here. Probably a more simpler affair. It would have taken them a while to get the concrete and the huts and everything ready. But as I said at the start, this is a site that we looked at back in 2017, and it's one of 4 Bofors gun sites still in existence in the Lerwick area. There's one here, one at the Nab, and 2 on Bressa. On the top left-hand side up here is the remains of a track which runs from behind the Steny Hill housing estate, leading to the Bofors site. Down here we have the crew hut, which would have been the living quarters for the gun crew when they're on duty, and also which appears to be a small wash house on the right hand side there. People manning, the men manning anti-aircraft gun sites would have slept and lived on the site when on duty, and typically they were at 1 minute's notice to man the gun on receipt of an enemy aircraft approaching. But they would also been stood to at certain times of the day, usually at dawn and dusk for an hour either side. This was the time when an invasion was thought most likely, so the guns were manned at these times. But you would also had observers whose job it was to scan the skies with binoculars looking for any enemy aircraft. And these
Guys,
men would have stood.
Can I interrupt for a second? I've lost the plot completely. I'm back at the track, the wash house, and the crew hut on North Stanley Hill.
Yeah, that's where we're at.
Can you help me? That's where you're at. Okay, carry on. Yep, okay.
Yeah, there may be a bit of a lag with the connection tonight. I'm not sure, but yeah.
Okay, no problem.
It's probably jumping around a bit.
Yep, okay, carry on.
No problem. So yeah, I was saying about the observers, it was their job to scan the skies for enemy aircraft, and they would be out in all weathers, usually in 2-hour stints. Not a job to be envied, certainly not this time of year. And I think Steve might be able to confirm this at the end, but I think this area is going to be turned into a lagoon as part of the new Steny Hill building project sometime in the not too distant future. So these buildings, or their mains, these hut bases here, will be underwater. And there we are, back in July 2015. Can't believe that photo was taken 5 years ago. But we're standing on the gun platform for the Bofors gun. And this provided a level platform for the gun to be fired from. It would have been hauled up into position and then jacked up on outriggers, extendable legs, so the gun would be stable when it was fired. From the platform there, you have more than 180-degree arc of fire, which goes right from the north mouth of the harbour right round to the Nessa Sound. At the time, this would have been sandbagged to provide protection to the gun crews. But a lot of sites in Shetland, particularly those in the South Mainland, have crude stone walls built around them. And here we have the ammunition hut for the site where the boxes of ammunition would have been stored. And I always remember when we were doing the survey of the site, Steve saying how it looked like, we were looking at the structure and Steve saying how it looked like it had been built in a hurry because the roof beams had just been pushed into the wet concrete. And so now we know that it was built in a hurry, and we know the reason why. It would have had a roof, probably a corrugated iron roof, which is completely rusted away now. And the track to the site, which runs from the back of the Stony Hill housing estate, terminates here. And also there's a possible concrete slab, which might have been a guard post opposite here. So next up, I want to speak about some of the research material I used to put the book together. And I tried throughout to use primary sources. I didn't want to go down the route of, second-hand accounts or family stories that have been handed down and embellished over the years. So it was really about going back to the primary sources, the immediate first-hand accounts from the people who were there at the time. So I was predominantly using the likes of war diaries, newspapers, and other memoirs that I was able to find during the research. And here we have an example of a war diary of the 297th Heavy Anti-Aircraft Battery from December 1940. War diaries, they're basically a record of events recorded by an army unit, and they're usually typed up by a junior officer at the end of the day. They can be quite mundane at times. It depends on the person who is writing them, but they're an excellent resource, and they can be cross-referenced against other units' diaries to confirm things did happen. So this example here, you can see the bits I've highlighted. It's talking about an air raid on Sombra on the 9th of December 1940. And I'll read it out to you. 9th December 1940 at 12:10. Junkers 88 passed over Sunbury Aerodrome at 12:10 hours, flying at a height of 100 feet in the east-southeasterly direction. Fire was not opened by, this is in code to this bit, but I'll translate it for you. Fire was not opened by heavy anti-aircraft site on Ward Hill or heavy anti-aircraft site at Scatsness, the Beaufort's gun at Exnabo or the Beaufort's gun at Wilsoness. The plane machine gunned Scatness. No bombs were dropped and there were no casualties. During the time the plane was within range of Ward Hill, but the Safety Act prevented fire being opened. No warning was received by either the heavy or light anti-aircraft gun sites. Now, this is just one part of what happened this day. There was a series of attacks on ships and sites across Shetland. The first was the steamer, the St. Ronald, which was machine gunned by this aircraft. It then arrived at Sunbury, which is what this record is talking about here, and machine gunned the heavy anti-aircraft site at Scatness before disappearing around the lighthouse and heading up the east coast. It then attacked a trawler called the Mary Bruce, south of Lerwick, and eventually it reappeared up in Unst and machine gunned houses in Haroldswick and Baldersound, and also carried out an attack on the radar station at Lamboness, RAF SCA. But I'm going to read out very quickly an account by an eyewitness of this incident. And it's by a chap called Freddie Flowers, who was based at the RAF radar station at SCA at the time. We had been on site for 3 or 4 weeks when one morning we were all indoors keeping warm when suddenly a Dornier appeared at about 500 feet, machine gun in our living quarters. He circled us 2 or 3 times and you could clearly see the gunners shooting at us. At the first shots, we ran outside with our rifles, which were the only defense we had, and I, like most of the others, took cover behind a tuft of grass and returned this fire. Our commanding officer was rushing about, firing his revolver into the air and shouting, "Take cover." Behind what, I wasn't sure. The technical site, which was not yet operational, was not attacked. On checking the damage, we were amazed to find no one had been hurt. Our billets were full of holes, and so were our clothes and equipment, which were hanging on the walls. The worst was the dining hall. The tables were riddled with bullets. Bottles of sauce, glass, and crockery were in pieces. If we had been eaten at the time of the attack, there would have been many casualties. So that was an account of a separate incident to this one on the war diary that happened up in Unst. And you also see another line down the bottom here, 25th of December, 1940, Christmas Day. And it says, a Dornier 17 was engaged from L1. L1 was a heavy anti-aircraft site above Seafield in Lerwick. 12 rounds being fired, it says. And the Cruiser site in Bressa also, it doesn't state it on this record, also opened fire on this aircraft with 9 rounds. And this was the first occasion that either of these sites had opened fire in anger on an enemy aircraft since they were installed in May 1940. The aircraft disappeared to the south and wasn't seen again. But that same afternoon, and the aircraft was shot down over Orkney and crash landed at a field. And some of the sources from the time say that this was the same aircraft that was seen over over Shetland, Lerwick. That's actually a Ju-88, and the war diaries state it was a Dornier 17 that they had seen, and the records also state that this aircraft was shot down before the sighting over Lerwick occurred, so not entirely sure if it was the same aircraft or not. Sometimes with war diaries, you can get really interesting appendices crammed in, just sort of random things. And this is one I came across, and it's a plot sheet tracing the flight of a Ju-88 as it came in from the west and passed over Sunbury at around 10,000 feet on the 31st of May 1941. This aircraft was engaged by the heavy anti-aircraft sight on Ward Hill, which fired 4 rounds, but no hits were observed. And this is one of those minor incidents that don't get a big write-up in the war diaries, but you were able to get a bit more information of what actually happened. So the aircraft comes in from the west. It's going about 3,000 feet, 5,000 feet, and as it approaches Sunbury, it climbs to 10,000 feet to avoid the anti-aircraft fire before it turns north and goes up the east coast of Shetland, passing over Lerwick, Walser before eventually disappearing out to the east. You're probably not going to be able to see this too well. It's a bit blurred, but this is a page from a RAF operations record book, which is the RAF's version of the war diary. For anybody who's interested, you can look these up for free at the moment on the National Archives website. When the COVID restrictions came in, they made these all available for free, where prior you had to pay for them. I've chosen this one as an example because just the sheer amount of detail it goes into, and it's about the events of 24th of March 1943, when a Ju-88 was shot down into the sea off of Fair Isle, and I'm going to read it out to you because it's a really interesting story. So it says 2 aircraft, Sergeant Lane and Sergeant Nielsen, were on a defensive patrol between Sunbury and Fair Isle when Green 2, who was Sergeant Nielsen, was at sea level, sighted a Ju-88 going north, positioned about 6 miles west of Fair Isle. Green 2 tally-hoed to Green 1, who was at 2,000 feet. Green 1 immediately dived towards the enemy aircraft, opening fire with cannon at 800 yards to 500 yards. The first 2 bursts fell short, but the third burst straddled the fuselage behind the cockpit. Return fire was experienced, but no damage done. The enemy aircraft was now streaming black smoke and dived to sea level below, followed by Green 1, who, having exhausted his cannon ammunition, opened fire with short bursts from his machine guns, whereupon the enemy aircraft dived into the sea and immediately broke up. Green 2, who had been acting as cover during the combat, observed 2 survivors. One swam feebly for a short time and then disappeared. Nothing further was seen of him. The other survivor was swimming strongly. He was picked up halfway into his dinghy after he had been in the water for 1.5 hours. Artificial respiration aboard the high-speed launch failed to revive him. Flight Lieutenant Glazer, who went out on an air-sea rescue with Sergeant Bickford before the high-speed launch arrived, dropped the K dinghy from the Spitfire, but this was carried away from the survivor before he could reach it. The name of the German airman was a chap called Gerd Bugram, who there is actually one account who says he was actually still alive when he arrived in Lerwick, but subsequently died. But he was later buried in the cemetery at the Nab, which is we'll speak about again shortly. And this is more RAF records. This is a combat report, and it relates to events of the 16th September 1942. On this day, a Heinkel 111 attacked the radar stations on Fair Isle with bombs and machine guns, injuring 4 anti-aircraft gunners, one of them seriously. As the Heinkel made off, as luck would have it, there happened to be 2 Spitfires out on a standard patrol, flown by 2 Canadians, Sergeant Jerry Eames and Flight Sergeant Joe Kistruck, who gave chase, and after a pursuit of about 80 miles, managed to catch up with it and damage it, but didn't succeed in shooting it down. And you can see I've typed up a small short quote on the right hand side there, which says, "I saw a tracer striking the fuselage during the final attack. Oil coming from the starboard engine to the trailing edge of the wing, and the red patch in the rear gun position," assuming the red patch to be blood from the aircraft's rear gunner. Incredibly, there's actually gun camera footage of this incident held by the Imperial War Museum, but unfortunately it's not been digitized. A lot of the interesting thing about doing the book was you'd read about Allied airmen, and they would have an incident. They would attack a German aircraft or something off of Shetland, and you'd be able to follow their careers. And a lot of time you would find out that they were killed in a different theatre. Jerry Eames has quite a really interesting story in that the following year in 1943, he was shot down over the English Channel by a Focke-Wulf 190, and spent 6 nights in a dinghy with a bullet wound in his knee before he was eventually found and rescued. And he even said that one night he fell out of the dinghy. He couldn't swim, but somehow he managed to clamber back in. And Eames and Kistruck were both part of 602 Squadron, City of Glasgow, and this is a photograph of 602 Squadron at Sombra. I'm not sure if either of these men are in it, but I just like this photo because there's so much going on you don't realise. If you look on this chap here, is a pilot from the Caribbean called Julian Marichaux. I think he was from Trinidad. I think he's smoking a pipe and he's wearing gloves. He was later shot down over Holland in 1945, but he survived. But it's just really interesting. You don't really think about it, but the sort of multinational force that was in Shetland during the Second World War, and that you've probably got Canadians in this picture. You've got a guy from Trinidad. You would have other people at different times. You would have Czechs, Poles, Free French, people like that. This man in the middle, it's always amused me, is holding a shotgun for some reason. Absolutely no reason why. And I like the way that the Spitfire's been tied down just using boulders. Moving on. The other thing I used quite a lot when doing the book was newspaper reports. I just picked out two. Unfortunately, a lot of the ones I have didn't scan out or didn't print out very well at the time, so they're fairly legible. So two of the better ones. The first is talking about the events of 17th of February 1941, when a Dornier 17 appeared out of the clouds over Brescia, heading in a northerly direction. As it came over Brescia, it jettisoned its auxiliary fuel tanks over Uphouse, and then dropped 2 bombs into the harbour before turning back south towards the town. As it came back south, at least 2 more drums, which straddled Garspool Road and exploded, damaging roofs and blowing out windows along Garspool Road, North Road, and the general Freefield area. If you know where on Garspool Road, where the Home Furnishings carpet shop is, that's where the bombs dropped on either side of the road there. Fortunately, no one was killed. 2 servicemen, 2 soldiers were slightly injured, but there was a small dog apparently killed, according to the newspaper reports. But Lerwick was just really lucky that day. I mean, it could have been, if the bombs had fallen anywhere apart from where they actually did, there could have been quite a lot of casualties. The second report, the one on the right-hand side, speaks about the events of the 5th of March, 1944, when a J-88 was shot down over Brescia by Bofors fire. If you remember earlier in the talk, I was saying at the start of 1941, Lerwick only had 1 Bofors gun, and that was positioned on top of the NAB. By 1944, the harbour was surrounded by 9 Bofors guns and 3 heavy anti-aircraft sites. So by that time, it had a pretty formidable defence. This aircraft came in from the south, flew over the NAB, and was almost immediately hit by anti-aircraft fire from one of the Bofors guns. Unfortunately, the records don't state which site was responsible for shooting it down. Is usually the case. It does say that it was engaged by multiple sites, and there's probably multiple claims, but they don't state specifically which one shot it down. They probably didn't know. This aircraft crashed into the sea at the back of Brescia, and 3 of the crew were picked up, but there was a 4th that was never found. I was speaking to somebody just before Christmas whose dad was an eyewitness to this. He was over in Brescia at the time, and he was saying how the shells from the Bofors gun NAB was going into the side of a hill on Brescia, and there was a story attached to it that that somebody had been court-martialed for firing the firing gun below its safety arc. The peculiar thing about the newspapers is that as the war goes on, they become more censored. At the start of the war, you get quite vivid accounts and eyewitness accounts of stuff that's going on. But as the war progresses, that starts to dry up, and you just get sort of bland official communiques. I think the reason for this is from 1942 onwards, Lerwick was being used as a submarine base. So there was a kind of bit more of a, it wasn't an information blackout, but there's certainly incidents that happen. There's accounts of aircraft flying through the harbour that don't get reported at all. And even the day after this JA-88 was shot down over Brescia, another aircraft appears, possibly looking for the crew, the one shot down the day before, and was also engaged by anti-aircraft fire. I also used a lot of first-hand eyewitness accounts, newspapers, magazines, and memoirs. Magazines such as Shetland Life and New Shetland in the 1980s and early 1990s carried a lot of these. And this is a really interesting account because it contradicts slightly what the official account was. On this day, 23rd of March 1941, two measurement 110s appeared over the hills to the east of Sulenvo and made straight for a tanker anchored in the Vaud called the Warbarata, machine gunning it and dropping bombs as it passed. These bombs overshot and exploded in the hills at Gloucester on the west side of the Vaud near the village of Sulum. The planes then circled back and were heading east towards a group of flying boats anchored in the Vaud when the lead aircraft was hit by anti-aircraft fire and crashed into the sea off Selness, killing both of the crew. At the time, both the heavy anti-aircraft gun sites and the Beaufort gun sites both claimed to be the ones that shot down the aircraft. But according to Ronald Jones, who was an army driver in the Royal Army Service Corps and an eyewitness to the events, he said that when the body of the pilot was recovered, that he'd been shot through the eye and was already dead when the aircraft was hit by the anti-aircraft fire. So it was kind of irrelevant. I also managed to use quite a few German sources, and this is a page from the German Naval Staff Operations War Diary. These documents were captured by the Americans at the end of the war and translated. Frustratingly, for me anyway, most of 1941, when the majority of the attacks on Shetland were taking place, these months were missing or destroyed. But you see the bit I highlighted up the top there, which is armed reconnaissance attacked the airfield at Summerhead and observed gratifying results. This actually relates to an attack on Sumbra, which happened 80 years ago this week on the 1st of February 1942, when a JA-88 came in from the east. It had been detected by radar, but misidentified as a friendly aircraft. It came in from the east, flew over Ladies' Home, Scatness, and then the airfield, firing machine guns, its cannon, and dropping bombs. 2 bombs exploded on the runway, leaving large craters, and unfortunately 2 ground crew, David Clark and Norman Leach, were both killed by machine gun fire on the ground. About half a dozen aircraft were also damaged in this attack, but the Ju-88 got away unscathed. No anti-aircraft guns got a chance to open fire on it before it made off. And interestingly, we got a Steve forwarded to me this afternoon email that came in from a chap, John Henderson from Tingwell. I don't know if he's on the call tonight, but it sounds like his dad might have been an eyewitness to this attack. Other German sources I used, I've managed to find a few pilot memoirs that talk about flying around Shetland, a few official communiques that appeared in the newspapers, and also some propaganda publications. And this here is a photograph of Shetland in the German propaganda book titled Immer am Feind, which translates as always at the enemy. And it's probably the only oblique picture of the Shetland mainland I've seen. It's almost like a hollow snap taken from the cockpit of the aircraft. But you see down where the red dot, that's Somber Head, the Westfall Beach, the Eastfall, Scatness out here. You've got Quendel, Loch Spiggy, Loch Brew, and St Ninian's Isle, and Bressa over here. The caption that goes along with the photo says, "After many hours, the islands come into sight. Down there in one of the many bays, the enemy must be found." This book actually was published in 1940. So this photograph probably dates from the winter of 1939 to 1940, but I've not been able to link it with any specific sighting of a German aircraft, unfortunately. Something else I used was burial records. I have chosen this one because it's got an anti-aircraft gunner and German aircrew on it. At the top, you'll see gunner Tom Robinson. This is actually a burial record for the Laxabigen Cemetery at Graven at Sulenvaux. Tom Robinson was a 19-year-old boy attached to the 266 heavy anti-aircraft battery. They were a territorial battery from the Humberside region and were the first to arrive in Shetland, the first contingent arriving in January 1940, the second contingent in May 1940. I'm not entirely sure. He died on 21st of May 1940. So if he arrived in the second contingent, he might not have been in Shetland very long. But Tom Robinson was accidentally shot, but I think and subsequently died from his injuries. But I think there's a general perception that the defence of Shetland during the Second World War was bloodless and didn't come at a cost. But certainly there's research that I've been doing that shows that over 40 army personnel died in Shetland during the Second World War. A lot of them, like Tom Robinson, accidental shootings, young boys playing with guns, quite a few in road accidents, Bren gun carriers going off the road and tipping over, that sort of thing. And also 4 servicemen in total killed as a direct result of enemy action. 1 at Tingwall, 1 at Fair Isle, and the 2 RAF ground crew at Sombra. So yeah, it wasn't really bloodless at all. If you look below, you'll see a list of German names, and these were all Germans that were buried at Laxabyggen during the war. There was German aircrew buried at Laxabyggen, 2 on Fair Isle, and about half a dozen at the Nab as well. So this chap here, this was a chap called Georg Reichel, who was the wireless operator, rear air gunner on the Messerschmitt 110, that was shot down over Sulemvo on the 23rd of March 1941. He was in the aircraft that Ronald Jones described seeing shot down. Below him, we have Wilhelm Zeller, who was a wireless operator on board Focke-Wulf Condor, which crashed into North Sea on the 17th of April 1941. His body was washed ashore at Höxter at Walser on the 21st of May 1941. When a body gets washed ashore, then they put the date of death as the date that the body was recovered. Below him, we have Erwin Sengbusch, who's also on board a Condor, but was shot down somewhere off of Faroe on the 29th of April 1941. His body was washed ashore at Binnenes, Whiteness, on the 27th of June 1941. And another one of the crew also washed up at Coleswick, but he was buried in Lerwick. And the man at the bottom is the mystery man. He was a chap called Johannes Sander, a 30-year-old who washed ashore at Kirkebister, North Neston, on the 1st or 2nd October 1941. And he's interesting because he was part of a air signals regiment, so he shouldn't really have been flying. But the military thought that he was a possible deserter on account that the wreckage of a Norwegian ship had been washed up alongside that stretch of coastline the week before. How they came to that conclusion, I'm not entirely sure. He could have easily been on an aircraft that had crashed into the sea, but they also state that no aircraft had been shot down for some time, so they thought he'd been on a party of Norwegians coming to Shetland. And here is a photograph of the Nab at Lerwick, and on this right-hand side here is where originally German war dead were buried, but sometime around the early 1960s, all the German war dead in Shetland were exhumed and moved to a military cemetery at Cannock Chase in Staffordshire. Now, finally, I'm going to come to the biggest Shetland historical myth of the 20th century, as I like to call it. And it's about the air raid on Sulan Voe on the 13th November 1939, the famous Run Rabbit Run raid. Most people will have heard the story. There's probably not a week that goes by that somebody tells me that the song Run Rabbit Run was written about this raid, and that the bombs dropped at Sulan Voe were the first to hit British soil in World War II. Unfortunately, neither of these are strictly true, but the real story is a lot more interesting. So to really understand the famous raid, you have to establish why it happened. And this is a timeline of the events I've written up. So on the 13th of 14th October 1939, that night, U-47 under the command of Gunther Preen sneaks into Sulan Voe and sinks the Royal Oak, the battleship, for the loss of with over 800 men. A couple of days later, there's a large air raid on Scapa Flow by the Luftwaffe. HMS Iron Duke is damaged by a bomb and has been run up onto the shore. And it's also reported at the time in newspapers and in war diaries that a stray bomb had landed near Lyoness on Hoy. This actually being the first bomb to land on Britain during the Second World War. As I said, it's reported in the newspapers at the time. It's reported in the war diaries at the time, and there's even a couple of Luftwaffe reconnaissance photographs, one taken the week before where you see an empty field, and one taken the week after where you can see what looks like a bomb crater in the field. So after this air raid, it's decided that Scapa Flow isn't safe for the home fleet until it's been reinforced, and it's subsequently abandoned. Some ships go to Rosyth, some go to the First Force, some go to Loch Ewe, but the ships of the Northern Patrol are sent up to Sulan Voe, and so that's what brings them to Shetland in the first place. On the 28th of October, the first German aircraft is seen over Shetland. It took the Germans a little while to find out where all these ships had gone. This is why they start carrying out reconnaissance over Shetland at this time. So the first aircraft is seen on the 28th of October. On the 7th of November, 1939, there's another reconnaissance flight, and they return again on the 10th of November 1939 for another look. On the 13th of November, this is the day of the big famous rabbit raid. 20 bombs are dropped, 12 of which hit the land. So really, when we speak about this air raid, it's actually two separate raids. The first raid happens on the right-hand side over here, where you'll see these indicated by these orange lines. So the first aircraft comes in. Going for in here is where the flying boats are all anchored, and there's also a depot ship called the SS Manila, which at the time, this was before the camp had really been established at Graven, so all the crews were living on the ship. All the supplies, all the bombs, all the ammunition was all kept on this boat. The first aircraft comes in from here, drops its bombs, but they go into the sea. A short while later, this other aircraft comes in, this time, according to the eyewitness accounts, a lot lower. Jettisons 4 bombs, which overshoot the ship and land on Selness, but fail to go off. So these technically are the first bombs to hit Shetland in the Second World War, albeit that they failed to explode. The aircraft then disappear for a while. Half an hour later, they reappear, this time on the western side of the Riveau. One aircraft comes in from the northeast and drops bombs which land astern of the cruiser HMS Cardiff, and another aircraft comes in from the west and drops some bombs through the clouds, which explode, hit the ground and explode at the village of Sulum. And it's also pointed out that sometime towards the end of this raid that 4 bombs were jettisoned from one of the aircraft, which exploded at Bray as well. In total, they actually thought that the German aircraft had made 23 passes without 23 passes of the Sulum Bow without receiving so much as a scratch. They were mainly contrary eyewitnesses that they were just going back, like dipping in and out of the clouds. So, but no more than one aircraft was ever seen at the same time. And this is a map that was drawn up, which shows the location of where bombs are dropped. You can see in here, it's speaking about the 4 unexploded bombs that landed on Selness. These were put in a turf pit and were recovered on the 6th of December 1939. And these were actually the first unexploded bombs, German unexploded bombs recovered by the British in World War II, and would go on to play a vital part in understanding German bomb manufacture. And on the left-hand side over here, you can see the 4 bombs that landed at Hull, at Sulum. And they also thought at the time that other bombs might have fallen in here, next to this burn here. But these later turned out to be holes in the ground caused by fallen boulders. And here is the famous, one of the famous photographs that gave birth to the Run Rabbit Run myth. In the foreground here, we have a chap who called Gibby Hawick, who's a taxi driver who took the photographer Bobby Wilmson up Sulum Bow. The story was that after this air raid, a dead rabbit had been found, but was in no real fit state to be photographed. So somebody caught on the idea if they could get a whole rabbit from a butcher shop, and they could have a really good propaganda victory over the Germans. They'd come all this way, and all they'd managed to kill was a rabbit. So Bobby Wilmson, the photographer, was contacted, and he was driven up by Gibby Howitt, the chap in the foreground, for a photo shoot with this rabbit. Gibby in the foreground is actually holding a bit of shrapnel, and the man in the background is a chap called, I think, with a magnificent beard, a chap called John Hawkcrow, and he's actually holding the dead rabbit. But if you look at it closely, you can see that the rabbit's actually been gutted. So, yeah. So, yeah, this attack and the story of the rabbits, once newspapers got hold of it, went all around the world really, really quickly. And there was sort of banner headlines saying the likes of Run Rabbit Run, and there was cartoons of this rabbit and Hermann Göring, the chief of the Luftwaffe. And at the time, there was a show at the London Palladium called The Little Dog Laughed, which starred Bud Flanagan, who later went on to sing the theme tune for Dad's Army. But they had a song in the play called Run Rabbit Run, and it was suggested by some of the newspapers after this raid that they changed the words to the song to poke fun at the Germans, and this is exactly what they did. And the song went on to become an anthem for Britain throughout the Second World War. There is a story I came across in a newspaper that a couple of years later, well, to go back to the start of the story, not long after the song Run Rabbit Run became famous, there was newspaper articles saying that the rabbit that had been killed during this raid had been sent to the Palladium and was now taking part in the show. And there's a photo of Bud Flanagan on stage holding up this alleged rabbit that was killed at Sulham in Shetland. Unlikely to be the same one, but it made a good story. And a couple of years later, I came across a newspaper article saying that this rabbit that had been starring in the show at the Palladium had been auctioned off and was going to end up his days in Hollywood, apparently. So we're nearly finished, but this is just a map showing the location of the bomb craters. They fell between the road and a house at Hull over here. Despite how close it is, they did very little damage to the house, blew in a few windows and lifted the roof slightly, but no major damage was done. And this is a photograph of the house. That's probably Gibby Howitt again, outside the house. And you can see that the windows have been blown in. And again, this is photographs of shrapnel from the bombs that were dropped. These were 50 kilo bombs, so they were the smallest bombs that the Germans had in their arsenal at the time. This is actually a 12-inch ruler here in the photograph, so these are pretty significant chunks of metal. And it was reported at the time that one of these bits of shrapnel, which weighed 7 pounds, hit a house 400 yards away. And this here is a diagram showing the trajectory of one of the unexploded bombs that Shetland. And it shows that the bomb entered the ground at an angle of 40 degrees, hit a boulder, then got deflected back upwards, exited the ground from here and travelled further 10 feet before eventually coming to rest with its tail missing. So the tail fin of the bomb is probably still somewhere under the ground at Shetland somewhere, but it travelled a total of 26 feet. And one of the things it discovered at the time was just how far bombs could travel on the ground. It wasn't just a case of you've got like an entry hole, dig down there. It's actually traveling a considerable distance in any given direction. And finally, these are X-rays of the bomb fuses from the bombs that were recovered from Shetland. As I said before, these were the first UXVs to be recovered by the British in the Second World War, and the conclusion they came to why they didn't explode was because they had been dropped too low and didn't have enough time to arm themselves. And this tallies with the eyewitness account who described the aircraft that dropped those bombs as coming in at mast height. And that brings us to the end of the presentation. Apologies about the connection. Seemed to drop out quite a few times there. If anybody's interested, you can pick up a copy of the book from the Shetland Times bookshop. You can also order it online from them at that address there. You can pick up a copy from the Quendale Mill if you're living in the South End, or you can also order a copy through eBay, or you can order a copy from myself direct to that email address there. Or if you have anything further information, or would just like a chat, get in touch anytime. And that brings us to the end of the presentation. And anybody have any questions?
Just before we get to the questions, Sam, you'd mentioned about the North Staney Hill. So
Yep.
yes, it is going to be underwater, but they are supposed to be putting a storyboard next to the site so that everybody will know exactly what was there at some time. And the spotting tower is meant to remain intact. So
The hard stand for the gun platform.
yes, the Bofors gun that you had talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah, just so everybody is aware that that's what the plan, the last plan that we saw, that's what it was. But go ahead, anybody that has a question, you can go ahead and shout it out now.
Samuel, the bombs that you said that were where the bargain centre is now, is that the ones that the plaque is for at the Maril?
No.
Is that a completely different
That's
thing?
something completely different.
Okay.
The ones at Maril was for a motor torpedo boat that caught fire and sank there, killing quite a few of the crew. The bombs that fell at Garstall. When I say the home furnishings, what I mean is the home furnishings carpet shop. You know where that is?
Behind Allied Taxis?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, now I get you. Yeah.
So the bombs fell either side of the road there. One where the home furnishings carpet shop is, and the other one on the opposite side of the road.
Okay, thanks for that.
I have a quick question myself. Are we, when you just showed the last picture from the Run Rabbit Run, I was a bit curious. Are those the actual bomb craters? Because they, I don't know, it just something didn't quite add up in my mind if those were the actual craters, but maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
The photograph with the guy with the rabbit.
Yes.
Yeah, no, those are the actual bomb craters. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, those those photographs were taken, I think, the day after the air raid on Sulambo.
I've got a question.
Uh-huh.
When you showed the bomb sites, the ones that were jettisoned at Tingwall, you said it was unusual because they weren't meant to jettison bombs over land at that time. I just wanted to know a bit more about that, please.
Yeah, well, basically, this happened in January 1940. It's during a period which they called the Phony War, because there wasn't really that much happening apart from, as you probably see, around Orkney and Shetland. But at this time, the Germans, well, not just the Germans, both sides were keen to find a sort of amicable solution to the situation. So they were kind of under orders to avoid civilian casualties at all costs. Things would deteriorate later on that year once the Battle of Britain and that sort of started. But at the time, they were under orders not to purposefully drop bombs over the land.
Wonderful, thank you.
Steve, are you still on? Steve.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Yeah, okay. You were asking about the bomb crater marks. Do you think maybe there's a difference between the bomb crater marks in Shetland because of the soil setup and the bomb crater marks in the Inverclyde area?
Probably.
They're much deeper in the peat.
Yeah.
So they've hauled themselves out, whereas maybe in Shetland it's a narrower set of what's the word, soil, and they hit rock before they then explode.
Well, would it
maybe get a shallower bomb crater? Yeah.
Well, what had piqued my interest with it was that I believe it was the slide before talked about an 82-foot diameter bomb crater.
Yes.
And
yeah.
I
spotted that. Yeah.
A crater that was nowhere near 82 feet. So it was just a curiosity as to whether, you know, they had actually done something when they were doing the little propaganda photograph, if they had actually, you know, jumped into some holes that were dug for a different reason or something.
Yeah, yeah, because our bomb craters in our area are generally 8 foot deep into the peat. You know, they're very, very deep. Yep. And I thought about that. I thought maybe there was something going on there. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Well, it looks like, Sammy, there's it looks like you've got 3 people wanting to ask a question, I think. John Sanderson, Emily, and Andy C. If John wants to go first, if that's the case.
Go for it, yep.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, John. Hello.
Splendid, yeah. Sammy, fantastic presentation and talk as ever. And as I said, great further information on Shetland's modern wartime history is brilliant. I've just got a question for you. I was really intrigued by all of it, but particularly when you were speaking about Creustar and the anti-aircraft position at Creustar, and you mentioned the marker stone. And what was really interesting is that I think I spoke to yourself and Steve about going up recently to the actual bunker at Newgallswater that's unfortunately recently collapsed. but I noticed that exactly the same symbol that you referred to, just at the top of the burn at Newgallswater there. Presumably, is that a similar sort of military marker that was there? Because if you go to the top of the burn, there's a stone just at the top of the burn and exactly the same symbol on a stone.
Okay, so it has a War Department marker on it, does it?
Yeah, it's just at the top of the burn, and you turn left, and that's where the bunker was. But
well, that is intriguing because that was an auxiliary unit, top secret bunker. Okay. So I don't know why they'd be putting down a marker stone saying this is sort of War Department property, this area. But yeah, no, we're just going to have a look at that someday. That'd be quite cool.
Yeah. No, it's just quite interesting to see the symbol. But thank you. It's brilliant.
Okay, it looks like Emily still has her hand up if she'd like to ask a question now.
Yeah, this might be a silly question. So excuse me if it's a silly question. I was wondering about this gun cruise, because I've seen photos of the gun crew in Mid-Yale. So was there gun crews all over Shetland? I've heard stories who it took a long time to get the gun in position.
I think what you're talking about there is a gun from the First World War. They had John, who I was just speaking to a minute, he knows more about this than me, but they had some sort of artillery piece that they would haul out anytime they thought a U-boat had been seen. But by the time they managed to get the gun in position, the U-boat would be long gone. So I think what you're referring to is probably from the First World War.
Excellent. Thanks for letting me think about that.
Now, Andy, did you still have a question, or has your question been answered?
Yes, the question's been answered. Thank you. Just like to say an excellent presentation. Really enjoyed it, and very impressed with the research that went into this. Well done.
Well, thank you very much, Andy.
Well, following on that, Sam, I mean, in the chat function, there's a lot of accolades, of course, for the quality of the work in the presentation. Several people that have read the book. But I just wanted to read a couple of them. Let me see. One is, thank you. My mother and father lived at the Grind in Scatness, the last house before Bergie, and she told me that often she was milking the cows when the German bombers were coming over.
Okay.
Great comment. And then from Andrew, I'm going to butcher the last name so he can forgive me, Hollenrake. WD marker stones often used to mark out boundaries of areas of requisitioned land, sometimes in quote WDBS for boundary stones. Yeah,
you do see them. You do see them about. Also, I don't even remember when we were doing the stuff with Scotland's urban past up by the observatory. There was boundary stones there as well, and I don't even remember, but they had the anchor symbol on them, and they were individually numbered, each boundary stone. But these were Admiralty boundary stones, so marking the area belonging to the Admiralty.
Are there any other questions? Well, I'd like to say well done, Sam. Really enjoyable. For those that haven't read the book yet, by all means, you should definitely go out and make a purchase. But thanks very much for coming in, starting off 2022 for us with a thorough and engaging discussion presentation tonight. And with that, I will stop the recording, and that concludes our night. Thank you all for coming, by the way.
Thanks everybody for joining in. Apologies again about the quality of my